Hello and welcome to your weekly show, Hello Mr. President, where we celebrate the gains towards a strong united Africa and unearth, unmask and expose neocolonial politics and exploitation. In this first edition of the program, we would like to take a moment to reflect on the year that was 2024, the stories that propelled us as Africans and those that held us back. As we unpack these stories, celebrating those that gave us hope and those that troubled us, we would like to hear from you. Which stories inspired you of the possibility of a great united Africa, and which ones left you troubled about the continuous interference of the world in African affairs? Leave your thoughts in the comment section. So let's start with the stories that left us hopeful here at the Hello Mr. President team. The interview by CNN with the CEO of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, Wamkele Mene, in which he talked about Africa's trade increasing or doubling in the next 5 years. The reality of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement is that it has to be a game changer for Africans' unity and prosperity. At the moment, 47 African countries have ratified this agreement, and 37 countries are in a state of readiness for its implementation. We can only hope that the next 5 years would really begin to show what Africa can become when we trade and we interact swiftly and smoothly amongst each other. What we particularly liked about this interview was that subtle undertone of defiance that all those who had hoped for the African Continental Free Trade Agreement to be a failure are in for a surprise. As we continue to celebrate the stories that have given us hope as Africans, we need to take a moment to also acknowledge Ghana joining the list of countries that are totally 100% visa-free for all Africans. Ghana now joins the ranks of Rwanda, Benin, Gambia, and Seychelles to allow 100% visa-free entry for all Africans. This is such great news, and we hope this list will continue to grow as we look towards the future of a united and strong Africa. And it also helps us to take a moment to reflect on the AU's protocol on the free movement of people, which only 4 countries have adopted at the moment. We hope this too will continue to move in the right direction. As we continue our reflections of 2024, Botswana's First Lady, Kaone Boko, stunned the world with the most extraordinary display of African culture when she knelt down to pay respect to her husband, Duma Boko, during his inauguration as the president of Botswana. She did this with such elegance and grace that left us really excited about Africa and who we are and what we are to the world. And just so we know, Kaone Boko is in her own right an accomplished professional, a lawyer by profession. She is amongst what we would call an evolved feminist, women making informed choices for their happiness and for happiness in their world. And of course, in 2024, we saw an end to a 45-year-long fisheries agreement between Senegal and the European Union. As it stands, 11 African countries still have an active fisheries agreement with the European Union. We want to take a moment to salute Senegal and its president, Bassirou Faye, for making such a bold decision in ensuring that Africa's fish is prioritized for Africa's people. While much has already been said about the uprising in Kenya, we couldn't help but salute the bravery of those who stood against punitive tax laws. No one is saying we shouldn't pay our taxes, but the moral of the story is, will this be the generation that will lead us to the promised land of a peaceful and great united Africa? Our leaders better pay attention on how they deal with the Gen Zs. So while we mourn the dead and salute the fallen heroes, we also take the moment to celebrate those who stood their grounds, ensuring that the welfare of Kenyans is placed above all else, and by implication, the welfare of all Africans. But while we struggle to get things right, to defend the rights and freedoms of our people, and to chart an authentically African path, it feels like the monster of neocolonialism is always staring us in the face, and the need for a flame of resistance to be kept burning is always alive. 2024 definitely had a general supply of stories that spoke to neocolonial influence and exploitation. So of course, the China-Africa Summit happened in 2024, but this is just one of several summits Africa has with the rest of the world, superpowers and non-superpowers. There's a summit with China, with India, with Japan, with the UK, with the US. Everyone seems to have a summit with Africa. And in this summit, pledges are made as to how much Africa gets, promises are made onto what will be done for you and what wouldn't be done for you. The question is, can Africa really have any true friend who is coming for raw materials? Can we really boast of any true friend who isn't coming here to expand on industry? So the reality of all of these summits is that they have one thing in common. It's about keeping Africa in the current economic system, where Africa is simply a source for raw material for the rest of the world. And no good can come out of these relationships if Africa is not demanding and imposing that it stays with its raw materials and develop industry to refine and produce. And of course, one of the richest men in the world, Bill Gates, was on an African tour in 2024 to lobby for more GMO uptake among African nations, visiting predominantly Nigeria. The question that this visit posed, of course, is why should Africans abandon traditional seeds that they own and that have been handed down to them from generation to generation to buy GMO seeds? This really comes down to an issue of control. Who owns and who controls Africa's food system? As we reflect on whether we should be embracing more GMO or staying true to our traditional African farming systems, we should always remember that this is an issue of control, and we must be mindful of the Trojan horses. So there are things you shouldn't buy out of decency and out of respect for the other. So someone tell me, why did the ADANI Group attempt to buy over Jomo Kenyatta International? Remember, this was meant to be a 30-year lease in exchange for a terminal upgrade and for an additional runway. It begs the question, who owns what in Africa? Who owns our different ports of entry? Who owns everything that we consider to be ours? In December, US President Joe Biden was on a visit to Angola, oil-rich Angola. But this really wasn't about oil. It was mainly about the Lopito Corridor, a railway meant to connect the DRC, Zambia, and Angola. A super railway which is intended to ease or facilitate the export of minerals from mineral-rich DRC. While we hope to see railways and roads connecting more of Africa and trade and movement of people in Africa really improving, the question that this left us really restless about is, why do we only see commitment in building such railways when it comes to exporting Africa's raw material? And when would the world become a real partner in ensuring that we're manufacturing and producing in Africa? And while the world cannot be expected to change its ways, the real question is, when are we Africans gonna wake up to the reality of being stuck or being seen as a raw material hub only? It's one thing to be disrespected by the rest of the world who see Africa simply as a hub for raw material, or by those who want to buy our port of entry, who want to sell us technology which is simply disadvantageous to us. But it's another thing when we as Africans are accomplices to systems that were put in place decades and decades ago to oppress us. Do you know it costs more for Africans to trade in food products, in agricultural products amongst each other, than it is for Africans to import food from the rest of the world? In fact, Africa as a continent spends a whopping $100 billion annually in imports of food, while tariffs are highest and largest when it comes to trading food items amongst African nations.
The continent of Africa imports over $100 billion worth of food annually. Rice, maize, soya, different types of grains. The highest import tariff that ourselves as Africans impose against one another is 65% on agricultural products. So if you look at, on the range of what we call tariff peaks, the largest and the highest tariffs that we impose against one another as Africans is on agricultural products. And yet, we are importing over $100 billion worth of food from other parts of the world.
Africans have historically taken pride in being able to feed each other, to share food, to share their food excesses. How can we be in a position where we are unable to share our excess food with our own neighbors? When do we start to dismantle the systems that were put in place to oppress us, so that the rest of the world can benefit. Thanks for watching. We would like to hear from you. Which stories inspired you the most as an African in 2024? And which stories spoke of neo-colonial exploitation loudest to you? Please leave your thoughts in the comment section. Until next time, remember, sticks in a bundle cannot be broken. Let's work together towards a united, peaceful and prosperous Africa.